Hi everyone. Let's take a nice deep sigh of relief. Welcome to lecture 10 in our course, The Systems Biology of Aging, aging here and there, aging everywhere. Some people sometimes say that old age is a disease, but research shows that senior citizens are more at ease. Subjective well-being is at its max, and your brain is wiser, and you don't have to deal with a PhD advisor. Aging here and there, aging everywhere. Aging everywhere. Aging. So we're at lecture 10, Sleep, Stress, Friends, and Longevity. Put together some topics that you were interested in. It's fascinating. Yeah, let's take a nice deep sigh of relief again. That's to relax our parasympathetic nervous system. It's part of fight or flight response. It's good to breathe, especially exhale. In our course, we're coming towards the end. We're going to have another lecture on the cutting edge, biotech, long life in a pill. How can we extend the health span? What are the ideas right now on extending human health span and maybe even lifespan next time? And then we'll have another lecture on open questions. So 2 more lectures apart from this one. We told you there'll be exercise number 4, but we decided, since life is so heavy and full, not to have exercise number 4. So it's a good time to start thinking about your final project. I remind you, designed to open up your creativity. Choose a problem related to aging with someone else. So if you don't have a partner, Ben sent an Excel list where you can put your names up. And do something like the methods and concepts of the course to address it. Could be simulation, equation, song, something like the more or less like the exercises were, like one question from the exercise. That's about the length. All right. Any questions about the final exercise? It's supposed to bring life and light into your eyes. It helps longevity. I wrote here APOE2 inhibits Alzheimer, so we'll learn about that today. What's this gene? Okay, so welcome, breath, song, review, or like overview where we are in the course. And so this course will have an emotional trajectory. We'll start with the terrifying disease of the Alzheimer. Then we'll talk about one of the ways to prevent Alzheimer and one of the 4 legs of the elephant of good health, sleep, and why it's connected. And then we'll go on a break, and then we'll talk about the impact of social economic status, chronic stress on aging, and how that works. What's the physiological connection between stress and longevity? And we'll end on a positive note. What cognitive functions get better with age? Okay? Let's take a nice deep sigh of relief. And even the ethical question, why should we study aging from a societal point of view? Okay, so I want to launch in. by talking about Alzheimer's disease and dementias. First of all, dementia is not Alzheimer's disease, although it takes a lot of research budgets and right now, and it has good PR. It's not the only kind of neurodegeneration. There's different kinds of dementia. A very common one is vascular dementia. So the blood vessels are fragility. We'll talk about that next lecture, how targeting the blood vessels could be so important for extending health span. And don't have enough oxygen, your brain takes up, much of your oxygen because it burns glucose. It's like when you lose blood, the organs shut off last are heart and brain, basically. Like it's very important for the body. So if you don't have good vasculature, you can have loss of oxygen, all kinds of dementia problems. There's other kinds of dementia. There's Parkinson's disease. It's much more rare than Alzheimer, which is more about motor activity and deciding to take action. That's damage in particular neurons. There's different kinds of dementia. But Alzheimer, very famous, very common, and very frightening because it starts out with you lose cognitive abilities and you lose memory. So memory is so important for your identity. Right? It's like actually one of the most scary things I think about aging is you lose your identity and don't recognize people. A lot of people are very scared of this, and it happens to very many people. It's a disease typically of older. It's older than cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, or cancer. It's more towards the 85 plus. There are places I remember in my life, though some have changed, some forever, some for better, some are gone, and some remain. It's so scary that a lot of resources devoted to it, but it's not really known there's no really good medicine for it. So you can treat the symptoms, but in terms of prevention, the two things that are most strong are exercise, as usual, and sleep. So we'll talk about that connection. And now, in 2024, a major piece of the puzzle, why sleep is so important for brain health, has been solved. So I'll tell you about that. So what's this Alzheimer's disease? So Alzheimer, Louis Alzheimer, the German neuroscientist, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, did autopsies on old people that died, that had this dementia, and he found something in common when you looked at the brains. So you have the neurons in the brain, and near the neurons there were these plaques of amyloid junk, lots of them. And inside the neurons there were these tangles, now we call them tau tangles. They're tangles of a protein that normally sits on the railroad tracks. Neurons are so long, they could be like meters, to transport proteins on these railroad tracks called microtubules. They're held together by these iron clamps, not really iron, they're protein. Tau, and for some reason that protein makes tangles that kill the neurons. So and that causes a lot of inflammation, etc. It starts a lot near the area that's responsible for memory, that we'll talk about in several aspects here. The hippocampus, and it travels up to the prefrontal cortex, the reasoning, memory, the damage goes like that. And it's a long-term disease, so you can see in function of time, nowadays, there's a way to even image these plaques inside the living person using a dye and kind of imaging techniques, and decades, right? So these plaques go up, then the tau And here, more or less, the symptoms, which are mild cognitive impairment, memory loss, and eventually the brain is in such bad shape that you die. A lot of times you die of an infection, like you already can't take care of yourself, and immune system die of infection. Sometimes brain damage can kill you, so it's also lethal. I know this could be triggering, so you can, if you're my age, you might think of parents which have it, or grandparents. A lot of you probably have some familiarity with this disease. Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so what can we say about it? First, that it has two forms. One very rare and very tragic that runs in families, where you get early onset Alzheimer, so like in your 60s. And 95% of Alzheimer is called sporadic. It doesn't run in the family so much. So there's familial, which is 5%, heritable, and there's a sporadic, 95%. That's less heritable. So early onset, the 60s, the 80s. Maybe I should say that the reason I got interested in researching Alzheimer specifically is I come always from the math side, right? So of course it's important disease, but so is osteoarthritis, also very important. So when we did a study of the incidence of age-related diseases, so remember, incidence is the chance per year to get diagnosed out of all those that are healthy, that haven't been diagnosed yet. So you take 100,000 people that haven't been diagnosed at the age X, and you ask how many will be diagnosed between X and X plus 1, and divide by 100,000. That's called incidence. So the log of incidence of all age, like we took Israel's Clalit medical records, and there were like about 1,000 diseases that had 10,000 people or more, so massive data. We looked at the ICD-9 codes, the medical codes for those diseases. We tracked it. And you see this exponential and then decline. And I talked about that in lecture, I don't remember, one of the lectures about how we explain that. And the different age-related diseases, let's say you can have, diabetes, cancer, etc. They rise at a certain rate, they peak, and we could explain them using the SR model, where damage crosses a disease threshold. It gives you this shape, everything good. But there were two diseases that were not like that, and they stood out like a watermelon in a bowl of peas. And that's Alzheimer and prefrontal dementia. These two related diseases. And they looked like this. They rose 20% per year. And in order to explain them, you needed XD of 20, where you remember the death was 17. So this led us to think that they have a different X, different clock, a brain clock. And yes, yesterday when I talked about two kinds of ways that yeast die, we suspect that that clock will have to do with the mitochondrial vacuole pathway, which is called lysosomes in humans. Why? Because Alzheimer's disease, but also other neurodegenerative diseases. Like I would say Parkinson is like a regular disease in terms of its incidence. So, but these different neurodegenerative diseases, also Alzheimer, have as early event before this. They have their lysosome deacidification. So like the vacuole becomes less acidic also in neurons. After that, you get mitochondria dysfunction. So the mitochondria become fragmented, their membrane potential goes down in neurons. And then you get this plaques, which is actually protein aggregate. Just like in yeast, the same sequence. Vacuole deacidification, mitochondrial problem, ROS, protein aggregate. So it's very similar. And that's in Parkinson, Lewy body dementia, Alzheimer, just different protein aggregates. In Parkinson's, it's alpha-synuclein, and Alzheimer's, it's amyloid beta that I'll tell you about. But the same kind of temporal sequence. Very interesting. So these facts together show. You asked me, what's your name? Gonen is a mathematician. He asked me, in yeast you proved that this pathway was right. What about humans? So I say, in biology there's no proving. You can only have a theory and try to disprove it, right? So I think in yeast it's because of the simplicity of the organism, it's very compelling. In human, it's so much more complex. But what I like to do is to try to collect very many different facts from different fields. Like this is from epidemiology. This is from cell biology. So, right, this is from clinical stuff. So connecting all these fields that normally don't talk to each other. Because the neuronal cellular biologist, it doesn't, you never read that this is 20%, this is 3%. It's like just not even a thing. It's not relevant. It's like not it's from a different. We want to connect everything. Our ambition is to connect everything about aging, right? Like even this lecture, social economic status, which is the domain of sociologists. Why bring sociology into the holy temple of biology here, right? I think it's all important sources of information. It's like a nice deep sigh of relief. Okay, so now if we look at these familial ones, there's an opportunity because it runs in families. You can look at those families and ask what in their DNA is different. And within the family, about the people who unfortunately got Alzheimer's at age 50, 60, different from their brothers, sisters who got it at age 80, 90. What's in common? And when you do that, you find very specific genes. They're very, very informative. You put those genes into mice, they get Alzheimer. You put it into flies, they get neurodegeneration. It's like very tight story. And those genes are, in order to tell you what these genes are, I need to tell you what this amyloid is. So this is the neuron. And it makes this gene, this protein from the gene APP, which is a stress response gene. So when the neurons are in stress, maybe because of this stuff, they do many things, but one of the things they do is secrete this protein that helps them apparently regenerate their synapses and grow, and it's a stress response gene. Now, there's an enzyme that cleaves this. It's called secretase, and then you get a soluble fraction. Why does that? It's not so clear. Some people think this is antimicrobial peptide, for example. It's not clear exactly, but there must be a biological reason because there is an evolved machine to cut it. Right? Yeah. And this section is called amyloid beta. I mean, a certain kind of cutting that has 42 amino acids. And this protein tends to form oligomers and then these plaques. The plaques, around this area there's inflammation. Inflammation is, shuts down cell functions. The neurons nearby aren't functioning. It prevents the neuronal connections. It hurts the neurons. It probably instigates the tau tangles in some way. So you see them in Alzheimer. By the way, there's some people, old people, who die autopsy, the brain full of plaques, and they don't have Alzheimer. So there's protective mechanisms we'll talk about, but it's it's part of the definition of the disease. Actually, to diagnose you with Alzheimer, you need to have the plaques and the tangles in an autopsy to really get a definitive definition. Okay. Now, what are the familial genes that are mutated or variant in the families that get Alzheimer? They are APP and secretase. APP and secretase. Right? So APP and what's called presenilin 1 and 2, which are there's two secretases, beta and gamma or something. If you have basically more of these, that's what those variants do, you get more plaques and you get an accelerated Alzheimer. Did I explain myself? Now you put these guys into mice and you get what's called, mice don't get Alzheimer, but if you put them 5 different alleles of these APP and presenilins, what's called 5XFAD, familial Alzheimer's disease, you get mouse models that do get Alzheimer's. And you can study your drugs on them. So that's how, and I'm just trying to explain to you this way biology works. You have the families, you find the genes, you put them into mice, you put them into flies, you put them into, see what they do, you study the biochemistry, try to build a study. So thousands of labs. And okay. Going back to our mathematics now, I want to plot here the disease-free survival. So at age 0, nobody has Alzheimer. And I'm going to put here, I'm going to take a sample of people from the population who got Alzheimer. 95% of these people have sporadic Alzheimer. This is a late onset Alzheimer. So let's take the late onset Alzheimer group and ask what age do you develop it? What age you get to 50%? And it looks like a survival curve. This is how many don't have it till age. So do you remember Shachaf? Shachaf was working on this. What's the halfway point? Yeah. 75. 75, 78, whatever. And if you take these familial variants, you get something, I'm exaggerated here, I don't know, 60, let's see. Of course, I exaggerated the difference here. Now we can play, just like we did with yeast. What are the houses and what are the trucks for the clock that's different, right? Like in yeast, because we have mutants, we have survival curves. We can look at their steepness. So touching back to, we can ask, what are the houses? What are the trucks? So yeast doesn't have trucks, as I said, but here we will have trucks. What is the threshold? How? By the steepness. And T50. So what Shachaf did, and Ifan Yang, Shachaf is a master's student from physics, and you also studied neuroscience? Physics and neuroscience? Where? Tel Aviv. Right. Age divided by age 50. So now you reach 50% at 1, and the two curves are collapse on top to each other. And for us, if you remember, this means houses. Not in yeast it's different in humans and stuff because of the SR model. And if I'm looking at steady state, if I if I increase house production rate, it's like reducing time. They're equivalent. If I increase house production rate, make more garbage, it's like reducing time. Time goes faster. So it's like stretching time. So these mutations stretch time. They accelerate time. They accelerate the time when 10% get it, 20% get it, 50% get it, 70% at the same proportions. Did I explain myself? For us, that's a sign that they're in the houses. And that makes perfect sense, right? Because the plaques are right there in the beginning of the process. They generate something, the garbage, which we need to find out what it is. Just like trying to build what's the garbage. And I want to tell you another little bit of history. And because of this amazing line of research, drug companies spend, I would say, probably safe to say, many tens of billions of dollars to develop drugs that remove plaques. And the drugs they developed were antibodies that bind the plaques, and then the immune system eats up the plaques better. Yeah. So those drugs, you can look in the imaging and see that they work. They reduce plaques. But when you look clinically, at least they tried it on people who have quite advanced symptoms, you don't see an improvement in the symptoms. And actually, you see a little bit more bleeding, cerebral bleeding. So FDA actually approved one of those drugs, a big scandal, just on the basis that it reduced plaque without really a significant improvement. The most recent news is so people were saying, look, this whole plaque hypothesis must be wrong. We were looking at drug treatment. And then there's now one antibody like that from a different company, different strategy, but also for the plaques, that does help to delay symptoms. So the needle is moved for the first time, I would say. Very expensive drugs, but so it's an evolving story. But it's not only plaques, right? So some people think it's tau should be targeted. Some people think, but if we knew what the garbage is, maybe we can find new strategies to target the disease, right? So okay, I'm talking a lot, so maybe time to ask you guys to ask me a question. Yeah.
So we're talking about aerotoxicity, but could there be a loss of function of this protein?
You mean suppose APP loss of function? I don't know about that. I mean, I'm guessing it'll have bad effects because it's a neuroprotective protein. Did you have a question? Yeah.
There's a rare disease called Huntington's disease.
Yeah.
Genetics we understand. It sounds sort of similar to this, where basically the number of repeats you have of a certain gene, it kind of shifts the curve.
Correct. So Huntington, you have some repeats that are misread because of the repeats. Polyglutamine, I don't remember. And according to the number, what? Huh? Like, according to the problem you have, it's like this is one disease where you know when you're going to die because it's very accurate to tell you when you're going to get this disease. Again, it's a familial, very rare disease, neurodegenerative. And it's also, it has to do with protein aggregates, and it also has to do with all this stuff that I talked about. And it also shifts the curve, just like you said. So very similar, I agree. So I think there's some mathematical similarity between who said that? And in the history of aging, it was very important because one of the first thinkers about aging said, why didn't evolution get rid of this rare genetic variant? And the answer is that it happens at old enough age that it's in the shadow of selection. That was like the first insight of, I don't remember who it was exactly, but it was, I have to come back. It's in my notes. Okay. What about sporadic? Maybe we can get some more clues from sporadic. So sporadic, there is some heritability to the sporadic also, so there's some genetic component. And now what you do is you do genome-wide association studies. You take a large population and you ask who got Alzheimer, who didn't, and you look for which genetic variant associates with Alzheimer or protects from Alzheimer. And in this situation, you typically pick up genetic variants that are quite common in the population anyway, because you need statistical power to look for a needle in a haystack. The p-value you have to pass is 10 to the minus 8, because there's so many multiple hypothesis testing, there's so many variants. So it's like very hard problem, and there's very interesting theoretical work how to do the statistics better and better, incorporate information, etc. And of course, the number of genomes is growing. Now sequencing genomes become even more cheap. Whole genomes with these recently long read technologies, very cheap, whole genomes with very few errors, amazing advances. And it turns out that there's a large number of genes of small effect, but there's one gene of huge effect. And it's the gene that's also involved in centenarians. The protective gene enriched in centenarians, and the bad variant is depleted in centenarians. Okay, so. And that is the famous APOE, which has 3 variants, 2, 3, and 4. 3 is the most common, 2 is in 5%, 4 is in 25%, and 3 is in 70%. Now we inherit we have 2 copies. So you can have 2, 2, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 3, 4, or 4, 4, right? If you have 4, 4, you have 12 times risk for Alzheimer. So that's it. Most people with Alzheimer have the 4, some 4, 4, 4, 4, 3. And it falls like this. I don't know. Let's see. 3, 3 is the standard. Most people have. And 2, 2 is very protective. It's basically no Alzheimer disease. Well, raising the question, why didn't natural selection get rid of 4? I want to say 4 is also all-cause mortality. It's also linked to cardiovascular disease, dyslipidemia. This APOE is a lipid handling protein. Lipids are fats. Fats, oil and water, they don't mix with water. So if you want to get them from your fat cell to your brain, you need a carrier protein that's in one part hydrophobic, so it binds to fat, and on the outside it's hydrophilic. It can be in water, and this kind of creates kind of an emulsion, like when you do a salad dressing, and is able to transport the fat, or transfer the fat back to the liver to go out of you in bile. So these APO are apolipoprotein. So so when you look at them, you have the APO. There's different kinds of APOs. This APOE is the main one in the brain, and it's also in the body. And inside are these fats and cholesterol. So for instance, if you know the bad cholesterol, it has ApoB on it. Causes heart disease. This one has 3 variants. So that's interesting. So what's going on here? And what does it do, right? So it has to do with, basically, one of the things it does is bind those amyloids. And then the immune cells in the brain, called glia, can take them up. And they do that with a receptor called TREM2. And TREM2 is the second biggest hit gene that is a risk factor for a variant of it for Alzheimer's. So they work together, but it has so many functions. It's very confusing here, and maybe our math stuff can help make it even more confusing. So here's what Shachaf did. So this is familial, right? This is APP, or presenilin. Let's do the same thing with the different APOs. Ease, age, disease-free survival. And our reference will be 3.3, most common variant. Okay? Four, 4.3. 2.3, 2.2. So that makes sense, because the more dose you have of the bad variant, the shorter you survive without the disease. Did I explain myself? It's almost like a dose response curve. What happens when you ask about, is it steep or not? It's hard to see here by eye, right? So you need to scale age by age 50. Any guesses? You can't guess. So it turns out that they are steeper. So I made green, but what I don't want to confuse you. So the familial ones are scaling. These ones are the APOE 4. Let's say 4.3. 2.4 I think is also bad, right? What's dominant, 2 or 4? So like the 2.4, the 4 wins, the bad one wins over the 2. Okay, so that is a dilemma, because it means that this APOE 4 is short-lived and steep. And there's no SR model parameter that does that. If you change the houses, you change the lifespan, but not the steepness. If you change the trucks or the threshold, you get, let's say, long-lived and steep or short-lived and shallow. But short-lived and steep means you have to change at least 2 different things. And it's paradoxical. It means that this APOE 4 is bad in houses and it's protective in threshold. So it's pleiotropic. Maybe providing a clue why it's still there, because it has 2 functions, protective and bad. So we have our APP forming these plaques. We think that the garbage is neuroinflammation, which hurts much more neurons than just those ones that are damaged. The trucks are these glia that affect them, and the APOE somehow raises the threshold and destroys the plaque formation. So it has a destructive pro-amyloid and some kind of protective, neuroprotective function. All right. So I want to finish up on Alzheimer to say that about 10 years ago, there was a very important advance in neuroscience, which is to discover that just like the body has a lymph system where the immune system flows, the brain has a kind of a gutter that takes junk out of the brain. It's water around our cerebrospinal fluid, around the arteries and around the arteries, there's these astrocytes that form a space where water flows, and these amyloid betas get cleared. They get dumped into the lymph in the brain casing. That goes into the lymph, into the veins, and it's a gutter, lymphatic system. And it was also figured out, that this works at night when you sleep. Water flows when you sleep. And indeed, if you have sleep problems, short sleep or fragment sleep, in large demographic studies where you follow people for 25 years, measure their sleep, sometimes even with accelerometers, so it's an objective measure of sleep. Sleep below 5 hours a night chronically, and increased risk of Alzheimer by 20% or so. Now, since Alzheimer is quite common, that's a big absolute risk. So there's some connection between sleep and Alzheimer. Also, exercise and Alzheimer, and I want to demystify that when we talk about sleep. So let's see. We did amyloid beta tau, familiar, sporadic, presenilin, APOE 234, extracortical eta, lymphatic system sleep.
Can I ask something about Alzheimer?
Yeah.
You started from the fact that Alzheimer doesn't work with the ESA model. And then we try to fit, to understand what parameter of ESA model explains stuff, but we said it already has different X.
Different X. So what I meant to say is that our best guess is that there's an SR model for the body with some parameters, and a different SR model for the brain that has other parameters. So it has its own ETA houses, and we try to understand basically what I showed you in yeast, where we try to look at the steepness of survival curves and understand whether it's damage production, damage removal. We try to do the same thing here. But so it's like two SR models in the same body, one for the brain, one for the body.
But if it would have another different ESA model, we would still see a shape that is similar to other diseases.
So it does have a shape similar to other diseases. The only problem is in this threshold. The threshold can't explain with one set of parameters these curves and these curves. But if you have another SR model with a different set of parameters, I can explain it. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but we don't know them.
Don't know. This is just theory.
So it's okay, we didn't pay attention.
Yeah, if you missed what I said,
No, I mean,
it's
in the
fine.
song.
In the song, you say when you're older and you begin to get dementia, you'll think back about this course and wish you paid attention.
Yeah, but you don't know the ESA model for it.
Yeah, so
Okay.
bad worry. See, I was found out. It's true. But at least I now know that you paid attention. So sleep is one of the four legs of health. Do you remember what the other ones are?
Social interactions.
Yeah?
Exercise, diet,
Yeah?
nutrition.
Yeah, nutrition, diet, social exercise, and sleep. So, how much is enough?
1
So risk of disease and death basically also has a U shape in epidemiological studies. And 7, 8 is good. 8 is good, let's say. For adults. For children, you need more, yeah. And as I said, for Alzheimer, people here have a, let's say, 20% higher risk of Alzheimer. When we think about sleep, we think about the stages of sleep. So by the way, 8 means, how much is 8 divided by 24? What fraction of life is it? A third of our life. So this is major, right? A third of our life we spend sleeping. How many courses do you take on sleep? So it's undervalued in our society. So the book that I recommend, Why We Sleep, makes the claim that it's underappreciated, and we stigmatize it as a lazy and unproductive if we live in a Western world, and we therefore call naps, we need a good name to market them, we call them power naps. And there's not a lot of research, not so well understood what's going on there, but there was a huge advance in 2024. And so stages of sleep, this is time of night, right? You fall asleep. And basically, it's portrayed as depth of the sleep. So you go to stage 1. That's the way people think about stage 2, stage 3. These are called non-REM sleep. And then you go to REM. I'll explain. And then you transition back to 1, 2, 3, REM. So each cycle like this is order of magnitude of 90 minutes. So you have a few of them in the night. You go deeper and deeper sleep. And REM is when you dream. Rapid eye movement, so... And also your body looks like it's really excited, your breath, but something in your brain shuts off your motion. So I think of REM like, like neural networks nowadays. You train them the rules of chess, and then they play chess against themselves, and they become grandmasters without any outside training. That's why I think about dreaming. It's like the brain trains itself like that all the time, with the input of the day, what happened, and you kind of improve your natural artificial intelligence. A lot of emotions, sexual arousal, all kinds of things. You train, but you don't move. Thank goodness. Okay, so that's REM. REM is short in the first cycles and goes longer. And before you wake up, it's almost only REM. And that's when a lot of times you wake up in a dream. But we dream about 2 hours a night, and we don't remember most of it. And everybody dreams, also. Even if you think you don't remember the dreams. By the way, if you're in good condition, you remember your dreams. So it's one way to know that you're getting good sleep. Okay. What about this NREM? So NREM, so it's like, this could be 5 minutes, this could be 20 minutes, this could be 40 minutes, and this is the rest REM. As I said, REM grows longer. Well, it looks like the first priority of sleep is to get to NREM 3, the deep sleep. That's the healing sleep, the deep sleep, where if you wake up, you feel like you're very groggy, and it's hard to wake you up when you're in this deep sleep. It's so important that if you haven't slept enough, you go very quickly into this NREM. And if you, and once you get enough NREM, you don't need it anymore. So towards the end of the night, there's almost none of this deep sleep. There's mostly REM. It's very important, and kids have a lot of it, etc. What's so good about this NREM? What's so good about this NREM is that there's this brain waves or electrical activity. So in waking or in dreaming, the electrical activity is not synchronized because each part of the brain, so if you measure electrical activity, each part of the neuron doing something else. And this non-REM sleep, it's very synchronized. So what? So the discovery in 2024 is that I told you about the glymphatic, which is like a drain that takes away amyloid beta, lactate, all kind of bad stuff in the brain. Drain works by a peristaltic motion that has to do with the artery nearby. And it turns out that neurons secrete norepinephrine, which is like a neurotransmitter that contracts the arteries. And basically, these waves of synchronized firing cause this peristaltic motion and move the water through the brain. The paper summarized this with the slogan, neurons that fire together, shower together. Shower together. This is, of course, an adaptation of the famous neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that fire together tend to make connections. Neurons that fire together, shower together. When does this happen? During NREM sleep. So that's thought to be a big piece of the puzzle. Why that's so important? So if you wish you paid attention, what do you need to pay attention to? What kind of sleep? How do you get it? You need to sleep, first of all. Okay, so did you pay attention? Did I keep my word? Okay. The other thing is exercise, a big risk way to prevent Alzheimer. It does many, many things, reduce inflammation, blah, blah. One of the things connected to the lymphatics is thought, it makes the arteries better, less stiff, etc. And those are the other part of the pump. So your pump is working better. And there's another weird thing in mice, please. You know, do you sleep on your back, on your side, or on your stomach? Don't answer. So it turns out that at least in mice, there's a 20% improvement in glymphatic system if you sleep on your side. Something about the drainage system gets, so there's some, I don't know if it's true in humans, but so it could be that behavioral stuff can impact drainage. Yeah.
Isn't it more true that if you sleep on your right side, it's better for lymphatic drainage, like for your brain, but if you sleep on your left side, it's like better for your digestion? Like
Okay, saying right side better for your brain, left side better for your digestion.
I've heard that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how.
In yoga, you get up on the right side. I think you don't want to put pressure on your heart.
The right side when you're doing like yang yoga, the left side when you're doing like when you're
If you do yang yoga, you get up on the right side.
like if you're doing more active,
Active?
essentially restful, you get up on the left. But that's because in like the Vedic stuff, it's like left is the feminine and the restful one. And
Left is the feminine, and the right is.
the masculine. That's very good.
Okay, so thank you. So I have a lot of respect for old traditions, by the way. It's not. Imagine you're a doctor without biochemistry, and you need to heal someone. Thousands of years of tradition. It can't be all.
Yeah, and the whole age actually associates like the right with the masculine and the yang in activity, the
Yeah.
left with the rest.
I see. So there's okay. So you said yang and yin associated with old age and young age, masculine, feminine, and all these.
I didn't say
It didn't say?
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, I don't know either. Okay, so that's why you need to pay attention. Exercise and sleep if you want to avoid dementia. Suppose you go and test yourself in your APOE4, right? So this is quite common, 1 of 16 here. You could have a protective gene like CETP that will protect you even if you have 4, enriched in centenarians, which is, again, a lipid handling protein. It's a cholesterol, ester, blah, blah, blah. But it's not a done deal if you have 4-4. But apart from your genes, you can do the behavior. Somebody asked me to repeat what I said about coffee, so I'd be very happy to do that. How many of you drink coffee? How many of you drink caffeinated tea? So how can we improve our sleep? Right, so I want to link to coffee. How can we improve our sleep? So it's very well known. So some of it is less well known. Of course, first of all, is give yourself opportunity for 8 hours. Sleep opportunity. Second, schedule. So it's better to have scheduled it. Third, cool. So body temperature drops when you sleep, and if cool more easy to fall asleep. If you take a shower before you go to sleep, it's good because your body cools down and you can go to sleep.
Even a hot shower?
Yeah, hot shower. Exercise, but not 3 hours before or 2 hours before sleep. Exercise makes you more sleepy. Cool, right? And no screens. In general, no blue light. You want to make it dark. You want to have a good pillow. It's very good. If you can't fall asleep and you have insomnia, there's another huge advance called digital CBT. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. You used to need to go and pay a professional to do it. Now you can do an effective online course for insomnia that's good. It won't help you with your relationship with your mother, but it can teach you meditative breathing techniques, etc., what to do with ruminations. So I give you this list. I hope you pay attention to okay, your coffee. Thank you. See, you're really paying attention, and it's amazing and gratifying as a teacher. Can't tell you how much. So avoid, before sleeping, let's talk about coffee, and somebody also asked me about alcohol. Alcohol seems to make you drowsy, but actually hurts your sleep. Another thing I want to say is that avoid, if you can, the sleeping pills, because in this study, this pioneer study in 2024, the sleeping pills inhibit norepinephrine secretion and disrupt lymphatic clearance. It's all in rodents, okay? But it's known that they don't give you good restful sleep. It's known that they're not good. It's known for at least 20 years that they don't give you the restful sleep, but now there's a mechanism about the lymphatics. Also, there's a connection between using those and risk of Alzheimer and other epidemiological studies. So it's a big race to find a sleeping pill that does help the lymphatic drainage, but that doesn't exist so far, as I know. I put in the lecture notes a lot of information about this, so you can read it. Toma?
Why is the risk increases after certain months?
Why here? What's going on here? Here, I'm not sure the direction of causality, because some diseases you sleep more, like depression, half of depression, you sleep more. I'm not sure about that. Good question. Do you have an idea?
No.
Good. Coffee. You want to know about coffee? Oh yeah. Can we induce it? So the paper, they dream about using electrical fields from outside your brain to induce this kind of thing.
But now there is no known way.
Right now, I don't know. I mean, not no known way that I know, but it doesn't mean. I would say get this energy. Oh, when you're napping, pay attention if you get to deep sleep. So deep sleep. Is it easy to wake you up? If you get to deep sleep, you satisfy part of your brain's sleep pressure, and it'll be harder for you to fall asleep at night. So that's just a nuance about napping. So
like it's important to sleep at night, right? Not like sleep in the morning.
yeah, that's the circadian thing. There's a lot to get into, but let me get into it because of the coffee. So this is time of day. Our body has a clock. I'll write here wake, and here I write go to sleep, but of course it's different for different people. When you wake, you have a circadian up, and so the brain, I have to talk, when I talk about stress, I have to talk about the brain. So I made a mistake spelling, and hippocampus is like horse, seahorse. Looks like a seahorse, so hippocampus. Prefrontal cortex. We have the hypothalamus, we'll talk about. And above that, there's a where your optic nerves cross suprachiasmatic nucleus, there's a clock in your brain that keeps 24 hours. There's also clocks in your in the cells of your body. When you wake, there's a surge of hormones like cortisol, adrenaline. This is the wake, and at night it's low. Another thing you have is sleep pressure, which is buildup of adenosine in your brain, which is go to sleep sign. So you wake up, it's very low. It builds up during the day, and when you go to sleep, it's degraded. So at this point, the difference between wake and sleep signals is the largest. And like we said last time, if you try to pull an all-nighter, you feel very tired, then you get into the wake of the next day, you get a second wind, and then it goes down, and now your adenosine is here, and you can't stay awake after. Now what does coffee do? Coffee blocks the receptor, caffeine, for adenosine. So it's like adenosine is shouting, but the brain can't hear it. So sleep is your build, but you can't hear it. Now coffee has a half-life, and that's very genetic. Some people, I can drink coffee and go to sleep, right? Coffee has a short half-life. Some people very affected. So if your half-life of your coffee is 6 hours, you need to time when you drink the last one in order to be able to go to sleep. Also, eating, very important when you eat, because the body clock says that I'm ready for carbohydrates in the morning. Beta cells make more insulin. But if you eat the carbohydrates at night, it's like taking a diabetes pill. So the timing of eating. So the circadian clock, with age, circadian clock loses amplitude and shifts early. So old people in general are early chronotypes. So there's some morning people and night people. Like I'm not a morning person. My wife is a morning person. She wakes up at 5. She goes to run. She comes, and then says, Uri, time to make sandwiches. For me, waking up is it's really, I need to just don't talk to me, coffee, water, just to wait for my soul to come back to my body. It's been out there somewhere. I don't know why, but with different chronotypes. But with age, people tend to go to early chronotype, wake up early, go to sleep early. Sleep becomes more fragmented. Circadian clock has less amplitude, so in fact, screwing up circadian clock in mice shortens lifespan. It's it has something, it's not so. And if your sleep is fragmented, it hurts your brain clearance and you get more Alzheimer. Alzheimer and other neurodegenerative diseases disrupt sleep. So there's a vicious cycle. The neurodegeneration disrupts sleep, and less sleep accelerates the neurodegeneration. So that's something to pay attention to. But you can work on your sleep right now. Start work on your sleep if you want to. Yeah.
Could you give people adenosine so they are more tired, so they have more effective sleep and more clearance of other things?
Brilliant. I never heard of that. Make adenosine or maybe an adenosine receptor agonist. Yeah. I don't know what to say. Sounds illogical to me, but probably you can find papers about it.
Where does melatonin fit into this?
Melatonin is a hormone that's secreted where we want to go to sleep. And it's secreted by the pineal gland, which is a gland in the brain that Descartes thought was a seat of consciousness. And I don't know how it works, except that it's antagonist to the cortisol. It antagonizes secretion of cortisol and things like that, which are wake hormones. But it does many other things. And it's good medicine if you're on jet lag for some people, because it kind of synchronizes you when to go to sleep.
Also for late chronotypes.
It's good for late chronotypes.
Yeah, to temporary, to help them.
To help them shift, yeah. Or teenagers. Teenagers, by the way, are late chronotypes. So there's a theory. Why do teenagers go to sleep at night, very late? So this is one of those evolutionary psychology theories, is because they need a lot of social input from their peers and not from their parents. So you make the parents sleep early and the teenagers sleep late. Now they have time to do what they need. That's just, one of those. It's a delicious field, evolutionary psychology. Okay, let me continue because we have a menu today. So so you have to time your coffees. From your genome, you can know if you're a quick metabolizer or slow metabolizer. I think I covered what I wanted to say about sleep. And now let's talk about the last leg of the elephant. Social ties, friends. Again, something maybe not valued enough in our society. So NREM 3 is when the glymphatic pumping clears amyloid beta and all other kind of toxic stuff. NREM, another function of sleep, by the way, is to convey memory from hippocampus to prefrontal cortex for storage. And so if you're learning for a test and you don't sleep before the test, then your memory is basically not retained. So sleeping is essential to store memories. Okay, so that's also something very important. Okay, so I'm going to erase Alzheimer. I was thinking, how to connect all these topics. And they're all connected, Totally connected. Okay, so social ties. Are a major determinant in longevity. In many different studies, many different pieces of evidence. I listed them in the lecture notes. And of course, also old wisdom, clear. Why? What's the physiological connection? So it's like this is a very, very emerging field. It's kind of mind-body connection. It's a immune, endocrine, etc. So emerging connections between our mental state, our hormones, our immune system. So it's beginning to be understood. And tell you what I think are some interesting, relatively well-established findings. So the idea is that chronic stress is a major risk factor for the four horsemen. And social ties, in many ways, inhibit chronic stress. That's one thing they do. So let's talk about chronic stress. And also how biologically that happens. How does social ties inhibit chronic stress? So when I say chronic stress, I mean the kind of stress, like you have a parent with Alzheimer, and you're poor, you can't afford a person to help you, and you have to be their nurse. And you can't help it. You're stuck. You have no control. That's chronic stress. Or you have a disabled child. You're in a situation where you have to care for them physically, all of it. Or you're in a situation where you have to be hypervigilant and differential, like you're low rank. One of my favorite studies is called the Whitehall study of British civil servants. They have several ranks. They have the same health care. But the lower the rank, the more death, disease, higher stress hormone, linear kind of with rank. It's amazing. If you have a vigilant and differential, you have not so much control. For in elderly, there's a famous study with the plants. Maybe some of you heard, in an old person's nursing home, and they did an experiment on control. One group got a plant, and they said, you care for it, and also try to have control over decisions in your life. The control group, they got a plant, but the staff took care of it. And they tracked them for a year and a half, and there was a big difference in mortality. So the ones who had control over the plant lived longer, or didn't die, died less. Okay? There's also a myth that when they took away the plants, the ones in control group died a lot. That's not in that study, but it is also loss of control in many ways, like moving, if you're forced to move from one nursing home to another, and then there's a lot of excess mortality. So loneliness, loss of control. So what's going on here? How can we understand this? And what can we do about it? So here I start drawing the brain. The brain has the reasoning part, the memory part, and then it has the panic part called the amygdala. I'm, of course, way simplifying here. Panic activates the thermostat of the brain that connects with a lot of hormones in the body. So that's an output port of the brain. So here, going into the body. Pituitary, adrenal glands, they secrete a series of hormones, and out comes this human stress hormone, cortisol. This is a hormone that's great when you wake up in the morning. Without it, the surge of cortisol here, you won't be able to get up in the morning. If you don't have it, you have low blood pressure, you die. If you are now in a stressful situation, it goes up, makes sure you have enough energy. So it gives you more glucose production, insulin resistance, so the sugar stays in your blood. Does a lot of things like that. It's an emergency. It overrides, no reproduction, no growth. Problem is when it's on, it's locked on chronic stress. When it's locked on chronic stress, you have high sugar, diabetes. Fat, I listed here what it does. You have appetite for tasty, high-calorie food. Does that sound familiar when you're stressed? Fat, visceral fat, which gives you insulin resistance. So insulin resistance, diabetes, hurting the blood vessels, cardiovascular disease. It's an anti-inflammatory, but chronic stress is pro-inflammatory, shortens telomeres. It's an aging thing. It's like an aging factor. Chronic stress. Who has chronic stress? Rich people or poor people? Rich people are stressed because they need to do whatever, but they chose it. Poor people are stressed, they didn't choose it. And that's why survival, age. This is the top 10% income. The bottom 10% income. This is 10 years. Social economic status. It's mostly mediated by education, by the way. Education, high education like you guys, is good for health promoting behavior and less being out of control, chronic stress. So you're already doing something good for longevity. And for Alzheimer, by the way. Good education, using your brain, gives you some kind of spare reserve for Alzheimer. So keep doing what you're doing, using your brain.
What country is that data?
So it's in all countries, but this particular one I put in my thing is US. It's really it's universal.
The top 10%, the wealth disparity is very different.
Yeah, I know. So it's more like you compare to your neighbors, and it's also independent of healthcare.
How is it independent of healthcare in the U.S.?
In the U.S., it's, there's more disparity.
Maybe to the,
Yeah, U.S. is like a country that's two countries. There's rich and some parts are like third world countries in terms of, let's say, child mortality and lifespan recently started going down because of the opioid crisis that kills young people. And so the U.S. has a lot of issues with very heterogeneous. So, okay, and I see this topic brings up a lot of questions. Why? Because in principle, this is something you can address with enough political will, I think, like the inequalities and stuff like that. Of course, I'm sure that this gap would shrink if. I'm not sure. You're asking like Scandinavia versus the U.S. comparisons. And by the way, this change is probably next critical if you look at the model, which is like resilience factors. So here's the HPA axis. So this causes, when it's chronic, cardiovascular disease, inflammation, appetite, fat, blood vessel problems, also psychological problems. So do you know the thing when you're stressed out and there's a fire, the door is closed, but you keep trying to open the door, even though there's a window? That's called tunnel vision. So when you're stressed, your brain focuses. It's very good, actually, for short-term stuff. But if it's like that all the time, your brain narrows down to the things you've tried before. So these behave. Also, cortisol screws up the hippocampus. It kills hippocampal neurons, stops regeneration. So high stress, you don't remember so well. You see that also in depression where there's high cortisol. So the memory and the prefrontal cortex, they can shut down the panic button. So they're very important actually for stress reduction, these connections, because it's all about context. So for example, one of the first movies ever made shows a train coming towards and people reportedly ran out. But now if you see the same movie, you don't run out. Why? You see a train coming towards you. Why don't you run out of the theater? Because you have the context, right? You have your memory. You have your prefrontal cortex. Emotional regulation. So that's very, very important. Emotional regulation. And so where friends come in? Where do friends come in? So friends, they do a lot of things, but one of my favorite things is a hormone called oxytocin, also known as the love hormone, but that's not fair. And it's secreted in good social interactions, and it blocks the HPA cascade. It's like anti-stress. By the way, in women and men, there's a sexual dimorphism. Cortisol, you know the fight or flight? So in women, there's a tendency for tend and befriend strategy during stress. Different strategy. Of course, this is just a trend. And yeah.
How can they know in this study if it's not like cultural?
This thing? You can't know if this is not cultural. Yeah. Except if you look at mice. But mice also have culture. Another tip. Do you know this thing that when you're stressed you should drink water? You know this thing? I don't know if you know. So it's true because there's another hormone here, like oxytocin, called AVP or antidiuretic hormone. It's the thirst hormone. So it does a lot of things to retain water. And when there's stress, plus you have this AVP, it amplifies the stress. And probably because it's like you're anticipating the blood loss. And you have much more of this. Oh, I forgot to say, cortisol raises blood pressure. Apart from this hormonal pathway, there's a much faster autonomic nervous system, what's called sympathetic. I already talked about this. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is relax, and we take a deep breath. And here it's high blood pressure, heart rate, heartbeat. This is in seconds. So so there's a fast and a slow arm. It's all this physiology is very complex. When we talk about systems biology of aging, the idea of systems biology is to start from a point where you know the basic components and think about how they work together. Here I think the basic components aren't exactly worked out. Maybe the hormonal part is, the brain is still more mysterious. I think it's one of the big challenges to understand this pathway. So how can friends help? So there's the hormonal part, but there's another thing. I come to you and say, that person is so bad. Didn't answer my emails. Can't stand it. And you, a wise friend, you say, so your boss didn't answer your emails 3 times. And you help me see reality more accurately. You don't go, yeah, he's so evil. He's so. And what does that do? It helps me perceive reality more accurately, right? One thing friends can do, they can listen to you vent. So here's something very important. Another thing to pay attention is the way our mind works is that there is an event in the real world that becomes interpreted by the amygdala as good or bad. And then it's interpreted by your prefrontal cortex that can say, no, she didn't answer your email 3 times. Maybe she's busy. Maybe she's on vacation. Maybe send a reminder. I don't know what. Maybe it's not life or death. Maybe you don't need to breathe so hard. By the way, it'll take 1 minute for the autonomic nervous system to make you feel bad. Unless you fuel it with your ruminations. Then you're going to feel bad for a day, a week, a month, a year, a whole PhD, a whole career. You're reincarnated. You still feel bad for the previous reincarnation. So this interpretation, right? So you have, and then you get, so things like meditation can put a space between the event and the interpretation. Psychotherapy, which I go to and use a lot. Psychotherapy, right? What's called the talking cure. Your good friends who can help you see reality better. You can vent with. You can process with. Yeah? These are a crucial part of human existence, okay? That we're not our thoughts, we're not our emotions, unless we're on autopilot. When we're stressed, we're on autopilot. So this is how friends and other things here can impact these like basic trends we have and help us, even if we're kind of out of control or in a situation where we have no control, we have inner control on our minds, our interpretation. This secret was known to the ancients, the Upanishads, the Buddha, to the ancient Jews, the ancient Greeks, Chinese. They all knew this stuff. Like, it was a major part of life. You learn about it. Now it's kind of lost. But I hope that here, among many other places, you can pay attention and learn about this. Maybe think about these aspects differently. Family, kids, pets, meaning in life. So if you care for someone other than yourself or something. And now this brings me to the last part, the positive and very hopeful part, which is what in our cognition, and we talked a lot about what goes bad with age, memory, speed. Sure. Even if you don't have Alzheimer. What gets better with age? Age, Z-score in a test for speed, processing speed, for memory, long-term memory, short-term memory, 110, right? What goes like this? Crystallized knowledge, which is facts about the world, and all kind of aspects of wisdom. Now, this is a research field, very interesting research field, a lot of links in the lecture notes. It's very heterogeneous. Old people are like young people, but more so. So it depends on your temperament. But in general, as a generalization, you have what's called wiser cognition. What do we mean? First of all, fMRI. These connections goes up with age. You have better emotional regulation. Which is so important. You have more empathy as judged by the way you interpret stories and make decisions. You see the greater good more than your own good. Again, not for everyone, but in general, as a finding. You make decisions based on values and long-term consequences. Think about things like climate change, the decisions you make. As a generalization, right? And
But old people make way worse climate decisions.
what will happen when you're old?
Well, I care a lot about the environment. It's like one of my major life.
When you're old, will you care about it?
Yes.
More? Less?
Honestly, I think there was more like intensity when I was younger.
Oh, interesting. Intensity is not the same as caring.
Yeah. No, care deeply.
Yeah.
I think there's another factor.
Yeah.
Because climate change is something that will affect us later. If you're old, it won't affect you much because you're going to die.
Unless you care about something other than yourself. So this feature of generativity also rises with age. Okay, so caring about something other than yourself. So it's what you're saying is typical of a young person in this stereotyped research like that. What it'll mean for me. But this kind of older cognition is what it'll mean for me and for everyone. And that's like a shift. Now, again, people are different. It's not math. It's not 100%. But it's a statistical phenomenon. You can test in different ways, either by questionnaires or by fMRI. So, for example, there's a focus on positivity. So you show people faces in emotional situation, and you measure their amygdala behavior in fMRI. Like you can see the activity of the brain without opening up the brain. And you can see that as a generalization, old people tend to focus more on positive information, etc., etc. So this whole list of wiser cognition. Of course, everybody could tell you that you get wiser with age, right? But there's a specific, like, breaking it up into cognitive functions, I think, is very interesting in seeing how to measure them, what they mean about these brain regions, how does sleep affect them? There's so many questions. Yeah.
I went to college and asked, and found that most of these things are apart from the first. It's easy to agree with what's written here, but post puberty and after, let's say, late puberty, even 25 or so, maybe people are more stiff. I mean, it sounds like it's something that gets better with age, but quite quickly it gets pretty stable, or also has a big shift when you have kids. Does it also rise linear? Does it rise linear with age regardless of kids and after
I don't know. So you're asking about a particular person's trajectory?
not
And,
a particular person
or-
with major trends in kids.
yeah, there's some studies on well-being that are probably true more in the Western world than that it's high. This is questionnaires. It's low around your 40, 50, and then it rises again. In Africa, it looks like this, and in East Europe, it looks like this. So it's culture dependent and situation dependent. But let's say in Western countries, there's evidence in different Western countries that when you retire, you're happy like you're in your 20s. That's also hopeful. Satisfaction with spouses, 40% unsatisfied, 6% unsatisfied. Maybe the other ones got divorced. I don't know. So again, these long-term social ties, capital, and maybe there's some. Okay, it's surprising how much disease doesn't affect well-being in general as much as you would think. It's like people. So it's another thing that's in the literature. So, your question is very good, and that's why people try to do controlled experiments.
I would try to test within 30, 40, 50.
Yeah, sure.
40 and 50.
Yeah, maybe you test 20, I think they usually test 20-year-olds and senior citizens.
Yeah, 20 is still, I mean, you would say that 20 is still a teenager, right?
Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe a late teenager.
Okay, so when I talk about this, I want to say that ethically, for me, if I try to think ethically, why expand the health span? There's an economic reason. Why is it good not to have people sick as long as they are, apart from the well-being of human beings? The first thing comes to mind is less medical costs, because most medical costs are in the last year. But actually that's dwarfed by the extra economic gain of people working. It's much more than the medical costs. So that's it. Second, I think there's unexplored potential for a large part of society that is wiser, makes decisions wiser, I think. I don't know, maybe I'm just fooling myself. I tend to be very optimistic. But the world population is projected to go to steady state at 10 billion once Africa and Asia cross the demographic transition. That's when women get educated, kids per family goes down. Of course, there's exceptions. And then at steady state, you'll have some distribution of ages, and you have productive, healthy people in their old age that are contributing with their wisdom. It could have a positive impact on the world, and also, who knows, if you're meditating for 100 years, how far can you get? You don't know. What's human potential in terms of wisdom? I think it's unexplored. Maybe a biblical figure like Moses lived to 120. But in our world, so that's for me intriguing thought. Of course, you can say those people will be selfish and conservative, but that's not what the data shows as a broad mainstream kind of finding. Of course, people are so different. So this is something to think about. Let's take a nice deep sigh of relief. And next time we'll talk about the cutting edge, long life in a pill. What biotech does, what science does to extend life and health.